Queso and Nacho Shepherd Public School. Once upon a time, there was a lovely school named Shepherd.
And while it is true that the school was ever so lovely, that did not mean that there were not needs. The amazing educator team thought and thought and thought about those needs. They tried many tricks from their backpack. Then along came an unbelievable opportunity.
That unbelievable opportunity was to have four-legged friends join their team of educators. Those four-legged friends came from National Service Dogs, and their names are Queso and Nacho.
Lo and behold, the difference those four-legged friends made was miraculous. Friends who would cry, tantrum, scream, throw things, and run through the school all of a sudden took pause.
Pun intended. Friends who would not complete work for their teachers would do work for the dogs.
The educator team was delirious with delight.
The educator team was so relieved because they finally had support with the mental health issues and trauma that students were suffering from.
As well as being part of the learning agenda, like reading support groups, the dogs also participate in our zones of regulation room and our child and youth worker groups. They help with soft starts each day for students who struggle with even getting into the building. And on the other end of the day, they help with friends who will not leave the building.
We cannot imagine life at Shepherd without the love, support, and intervention provided by our dogs now. No more flying chairs. Okay, and then we thought we would do just a little bit of a Q&A. We tried to anticipate what some of the questions might be. Are you aware of how many children suffer from mental health issues? Well, it's 20% of the population. That is a provincial statistic, and we certainly can attest to this as we see those needs and meet those statistics in our building. So we've actually done the number crunching. So that works out to 1 in 5 students, and hence the need for 2 full-time dogs. You might be wondering what type of trauma a school might deal with. Our CYW groups include stress and anxiety, divorce, anger management, confidence and self-esteem, self-regulation, grief and death, domestic abuse, and gender identity, amongst others. Here is a list of specific needs itemized that the dogs help us with daily. They create a welcoming, warm, and calm environment. They have improved student well-being and staff well-being too, reducing stress, anxiety, and conflict. They positively impact student mood, anxiety, and readiness to learn. They provide a proactive tool to reduce student problem behavior and interpersonal conflict. And they help to diffuse and de-escalate situations that could or have become volatile. How did we ensure success for our CAI model? We embarked upon a series of steps at school to ensure success. So we did training with the NSD staff to ensure proper dog handling, as well as them being available through emails and phone calls and visits to help with any other concerns or questions we had. We did PD with staff during a staff meeting. We shared reports indicating the benefits of dogs in schools, reported on the success of the program that started in Simcoe County schools, and outlined the parameters for the use of our Shepherd dogs, the safety requirements, and we also formalized the requirements into a document for posting within the classrooms. We introduced the dogs and the program to students. We held a whole school assembly to introduce our program to students, as well as conducting a visit to each classroom with the dogs that included a representative, thank you, Rochelle, from National Service Dogs, Rochelle being the owner of one of our beautiful dogs, Queso. We provided each classroom with a child-friendly book about our dogs, their purpose and their role in our school, including rules for interacting with the dogs. So we started this pre-COVID. The dogs haven't been as much in classrooms of late, but we're hoping to resume that with the rules changing around COVID protocols. And we ensured that the school was in possession of vaccination certificates, the license, evidence of having passed our training, and all those other necessary requirements that the school board needs. And that's the end of our story. So we're happy to open it up now to if you have any further questions or want clarifications or want specific examples of how they help us and our students, then we're happy to answer those.
Ladies, I was just gonna ask if you could touch on a little bit throughout the day, do any of the students access the dogs? And if so, how does it work? Is it like a bathroom pass? Do you get a dog pass, or how would they go about doing that if they're struggling throughout their day?
So we actually have a number of students that, so I guess to clarify, what a soft start is are students that have troubles even being successful coming into the building at the beginning of the day. So we have about half a dozen students that require that support to even enter class. So they come to the office and they sit with the dogs and spend some time with them. And we read social stories to them based on what their needs might be to help them be successful in entering into the classroom. And then we have a dog available in the office at all times. And we have a steady stream of students who come that are either dysregulated or anxious or just in an unhappy mood for whatever the reason might be. And so our educational assistants will bring them in for visits. And sometimes there's a little bit of a wait time and lineup. And then the other dog is usually with Sarah, our child youth worker. So when she's doing her small groups, the dog is there to help with the groups. And the students find that very relaxing and helpful and comforting. And then in the afternoon, when Sarah is gone to her other school, the other special education resource teacher is also trained in handling the dog. And she does small literacy support groups and one-on-one assessments and that sort of thing. And then the dogs are there too, or Kesa's there for that portion too, so that they have that security of having the dog there and that comfort level. Pre-COVID and post-COVID, we often had the dogs go into classrooms. So for classes, we have a lot of classes that have many needs. And, you know, we would have students often refusing to do their work, or they would be distraught. They would be under their desk or under a table or running around, and we would have the dogs be there just to help settle and calm them. And so, you know, as much as you try and have all the magical tips and tricks and words to help students, they don't always work, but the dogs always seem to work. I could walk into a classroom and a student would have chair above his head ready to throw it at someone. I'd walk in with the dog, they'd put the chair down and they would go to the dog. It's like it's a switch flipper for them. So it's really, really amazing. So post-COVID, we're hoping to go back to that model where people make requests of having the dog there for certain learning points. And then again, at the other end of the day, I talked about the beginning of the day, the soft start, but at the end of the day, some of those same students that have the hardest time coming into the building also struggle to leave. So we'll take the dog there and all of a sudden they're going to put their snow clothes on and the dog's going to walk them to the door. Or we have a little one who really hates her bus ride home. And so we'll go and Nacho will walk her to the bus and then she's happy and gets on the bus. There's a couple of times where the bus driver said, "I'm not waiting, you have to get this child out here." And she just refused. But with Nacho's help, she will go to the bus. So we have literally hundreds of examples of times where students are struggling for any variety of reasons, and having a dog there to help them just makes it a positive experience. It turns things around and makes our job a lot easier because we're able to support them then. So currently we've got dog in the office that EAs bring students to all the time. And then the other dog is with small group scenarios for the day. But like I say, pre and post COVID, the dogs had a little more flexibility and could be part of more learning opportunities. And they could be part of situations where students were struggling and needing help, because it's not always easy to get the students down to the dogs either. So that will be nice for us to have that freedom again.
Thank you, ladies. Does anyone else have any questions before we pass the floor over to Rachel? Feel free to.
Oh, me.
Yes, Rochelle, what's your question?
I was just wondering if outside of students that if the staff at the school noticed a difference having the dogs there for them.
Huge difference. So, you know, part of that whole setup at the beginning and, you know, having the layered approach of presenting at the staff meeting and then doing the school assembly and that sort of thing, there were some that their thinking was, oh, so we're going to reward a child who's misbehaving with the dog. That doesn't seem right. But they have come to see that it actually is quite the opposite. It's not a reward. It's something that does turn a child's behavior around. So even those that were maybe a little negative or a little doubtful as to the positive impact have really come around. And I would say that there's as many staff members every day that come to see the dogs as students do, because education is a hard go, and especially during COVID, and especially when we have so many little ones suffering with mental health issues and with trauma, and teachers tend to absorb all of that, and it's hard for them because they love these little people that they're taking care of, and so then it makes their heart heavy, so they'll come for snuggles with the dogs too, and so it's helping them to decompress as well. So yeah, as a matter of fact, I have to remind them that I am also in the office, and I would love if they would also say hello to me.
I'm also a principal in the school board, and I'm on leave this year. So when I get back, I'm going to be fighting hard with whatever school I get at to potentially have a CAI. But I had to step away from the computer really quickly at the start. Did they mention if the dogs sort of tagging throughout the day, or are they both working all through the school day with minimal downtime?
So I can probably speak to that. They get breaks often. They both work during school hours. From their school starts at 9 to 3:20, but they get their nutrition breaks off. They get breaks in between, especially after they've had maybe a harder kiddo. They get time to decompress. They go play stick or toss, or even just have a little break together where they can hang out and just have a chew or a Kong or whatever. So they do have lots of opportunity to relax and hang out and decompress, but they do work all day.
Awesome. Thanks, Rochelle. I also noticed that Karen and Carol both had questions in the chat that relate to Kesa and Nacho. So I'll just sort of address those. What was the application process like from the school point of view in NSD? How did you decide on letting them go to the school? I can speak to that a little bit, and I'll get into it later in my presentation, so I'll just touch on it briefly. But the application process is essentially the facility who's going to be using the facility dog getting in touch with us to let us know what they envision for the facility dog, what the placement would look like, what would be the purpose of the facility dog in that particular placement. It helps inform us to see and make sure we have the right dog to provide to that particular facility and that particular placement. It helps our wonderful trainers to make sure that they are able to train the dogs in the specific ways that's needed for each facility. And that's sort of the application process is really a thorough overview of what's your idea, what's this dog going to do, what's their impact going to be, what do you expect from this program, those types of things. And then we really work together collaboratively with people who do apply to the program to see what we can make work. And Carol's question is sort of along the same lines. There are many high needs students in schools in our region. I think that can be said not just in your region, but in many regions. And so how many other schools have the privilege of having CAI dogs? I'm going to get to that a little bit. We do have, of course, Kesa and Nacho, and then a couple dogs here in London, where I am in the London District Catholic School Board, and a couple others sort of sporadically throughout. So there are a few, I would like to see a dog in every school, but we don't have that capacity, unfortunately. But are we training more dogs for this program? Absolutely. We actively train CAI dogs as one of our 3 main programs, which I'm going to get into. So I'll talk a little bit about more about that. So I hope that answered those questions. And so thank you so much for being here tonight on this nice day. I don't know what it's like where you guys are. It's a little cloudy here in London now, but it was beautiful all day. And so thank you so much for joining us. As Emma said, my name is Rachel Braden. I am privileged enough to now work at National Service Dogs as in the client services department. But I also had the privilege for a long time of being both a volunteer and starting my journey as a client actually with NSD as a handler for Merrill. So I've sort of had many different roles at NSD and have loved all of them. And I'm now on mat leave as of last week. So I'm on a little bit of a break, but wanted to still pop on here today to chat with you guys about the CAI program, because it might come across in this presentation that I'm a little biased about our CAI program in that it's my favorite. You gotta disclose these sorts of things, and that's my bias. It's sort of how I came to NSD and the work that I've enjoyed doing ever since. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. I get excited about CAI, and it's one of my favorites. So we sort of jumped in a little bit with having the gals go first from the school. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit, just give you a background of what is a facility dog or canine assisted intervention. I'll use those two interchangeably, CAI and facility dog interchangeably throughout this evening. So I'm referring to one and the same when I use those. Talk a little bit about what it is, talk a little bit about NSD's history with facility dogs, CAI dogs, and then talk a little bit about my experience as a handler with Merrill. So I will jump right into that. So in terms of a definition of a facility dog or a CAI dog, these are specially trained dogs that come from accredited service dog schools that work alongside professionals in various settings. So these dogs are trained to do specific tasks, skills that they are trained to do in a particular facility environment across generally multiple different clients. So that's one of the main differences with facility dogs and CAI versus service, is that service is generally tied to one particular person, whereas CAI are providing services to a wide group of people. It's one of the reasons I love the CAI program, because one dog can reach hundreds, if not thousands, of people in their careers. And so that's one thing that I find really neat about the CAI program. So generally they work alongside the trained handler. They do provide goal-directed interventions that promote physical, social, and emotional well-being. And their handlers are generally professionals sort of with specialized expertise in whatever profession that the dog is working with them within. So in terms of the history of CAI and facility dogs, the first school actually to place a facility dog was PADS out in BC. They placed the first justice facility dog, Caber, who's since retired, although still alive and well. They call him King Caber, and he still jaunts around and has lots of fun. He's been relieved by Puma, who's taken over for him. But they really kickstarted the CAI program. And then in 2013, NSD was actually the first accredited school in Eastern Canada to launch a CAI program. And the first dog that actually went out from National Service Dogs was NSD Karma. And NSD Karma was placed with a social worker and deployed within a Section 23 school, which is essentially a school for high-risk youth, generally age 12 to 13. And so NSD Karma was deployed into the classroom, much like Kesa and Nacho, a lot of the same things that were described, helping reduce anxiety, making kids more available for learning, worked with kiddos one-on-one to de-escalate emotional behavior, model appropriate behaviors, boost confidence for the kiddos that Karma engaged with. And so that was really the start of NSD's sort of launch into a CAI program. From there, shortly after, we also placed NSD Holly, and then following that, given that success, NSD Uli. Holly has recently retired, and I think is still doing a little bit of work, but is mostly semi-retired. And Uli is getting up there as well, but they are both placed with social workers, again, very similar to the work that Kesa and Nacho are doing within the London District Catholic School Board here in London. And so they're placed with the board's mental health, well-being and counseling services team. And so those dogs are available, much like Kesa and Nacho, for counseling, for drop-in programs that help with anxiety, bullying, mental health, supporting students also through critical incidents, and things, like suicides and accidental death. That's unfortunately happens within our school system. And so I do believe that they are both deployed in their sort of crisis response model. And so they would attend, if there's some sort of mass victimization at a school or a critical incident, they attend on a regular basis to those things as well. So that's where NSD sort of started its journey into the CAI program. Again, really exciting that we were sort of leaders in doing that, particularly in this side of the country, and still remain leaders, especially in the area of justice facility dogs, as well as peer support dogs, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. So I'm going to start actually with just an overview of sort of who are our dogs, where are they, how many CAI dogs do we have, those types of things, and then talk a little bit about the different types of CAI dogs and the different programs that we have. So I believe, if I counted correctly, we have approximately 24 CAI dogs actively working, and a few more to come this year, which is really exciting. In terms of the split of where those dogs are working, for justice facility dogs, which include things like dogs working with child witness programs, in child and youth advocacy centers and with police victim services, we have 9 total dogs working in those areas. In education, both post-secondary, we actually have a dog placed here in London at Fanshawe College, as well as high school and elementary schools. We have a total of 5. So the 2 that you just heard about in Kitchener, and then 3 that we have here in London. And then peer support, which is the other main program that we have currently 2 dogs, and many, many more on the wait list for that program. So that program is sort of taking off. We were, I think, and Danny can correct me if I'm wrong, the first, if not one of the first schools to launch a peer support program, and so most of our wait list actually revolves around a lot of peer support dogs. And then
we moved into that space through the PTSD program, and because we were the first accredited program in Canada doing PTSD service dogs, we got into the peer support space ahead of everybody a little bit.
Perfect, thanks, Danny. And again, the neat thing about that is that, yes, we had a PTSD program. Those dogs were placed with one person and provide direct support to that one person and their family, of course. But the CAI dogs that are working in peer support are doing a lot of that work, but on a larger scale, and meeting the needs of many across a particular first responder service. So that's really neat. We have a couple of other dogs placed in other various settings. We have a dog who works at a dentist office, believe it or not, providing support there, which I could use when I go to the dentist. So that's pretty neat, and various counseling services and things like that. But our sort of 3 main components are the justice facility dogs, the education, as well as the peer support. So I'll chat first about the education just briefly, because you guys just heard with that wonderful story what Kesa and Nacho, as well as Holly and Uli, are doing. But of course, they're working with social workers and other child and youth workers, principals, teachers. They're deployed into the schools to support, of course, kiddos and young adults. Like I said, we do have a dog, Hartley, who's been placed at a post-secondary institution of counseling support among the post-secondary group here. But facility dogs in schools help to increase attendance. They facilitate cognitive functioning and promote better problem solving, building trust and trustworthiness in young people and helping to develop capacity for empathy. So you heard, Christy talk about the kiddo who had the chair, above their head ready to launch at somebody, and the de-escalation that the dog was able to provide there. Facilitating conversations around suicide, self-harm, bullying, sexual identity, and gender, all of those things that our kiddos are currently struggling with. And of course, helping to process trauma after critical incidents or crisis, whether that be, a crisis at the school or a crisis at home, all those various different things. So it was really great to hear a sort of firsthand account of what Nacho and Kesa are doing. And I would argue that that looks very similar to what the work that the dogs are doing here in London at the Catholic School Board as well. So in terms of, so that's sort of the one main group. The second group that we have is really, like I said, around peer support facility dogs for our first responder communities. So again, PTSD dogs, we see a lot of PTSD, unfortunately, among our first responder populations. And PTSD dogs that we place specifically with one person are fantastic and wonderful and make a lot of difference in that one person's life. But the CAI or facility dogs that we place in a peer support role are really distinct in that, again, they have that wide reaching impact. So they can play a key role in taking people out of their sort of stress response by helping sort of complete the stress cycle and decreasing the cumulative effects of stress and trauma that our first responder populations face on a regular basis, and I would argue amped up as a result of the pandemic, like most things are at this point. So there's lots of different evidence around evidence-based strategies of reducing stress within the workplace, specifically around trauma and traumatic experiences. So things like physical activity. One thing that you might see with our peer support dogs is the trucks come in. Let's say we have Ajax, who's placed with Mississauga Fire. Trucks come in from a particularly difficult call. And Ajax can be in the bay where the trucks come in for when the folks get off and, playing with a ball and a rope or playing, tug or throw, those types of things after a particularly difficult call. Things like laughing and crying, all those sort of general emotions that we might experience after a traumatic call. Dogs providing, of course, that non-judgmental shoulder to cry on, so to speak. Of course, showing physical affection, which we all know that our lovely CAI dogs are fantastic at. It's certainly something we look for when we're looking for a CAI dog, is someone who loves to cuddle. And then deep breathing, helping to regulate breathing and people who are coming from a traumatic event. This is something that I found in my experience worked really well too, is matching the breathing of the dog. So we would do this a lot with kiddos, put your head on Meryl's belly and match her breathing. So if they're really hyperventilating and they try to match Meryl's breathing, it's going to slow them right down. So these are all sort of known strategies for decompressing after a stressful situation. And these are all ways that our facility dogs have an impact on the peer support groups that we serve. Of course, one of the biggest barriers to supporting service members, both in the military and in the first responder community, is the stigma attached to mental health. In that, our dogs can really assist with being catalysts for things like breaking down barriers and building trust. So it's amazing, and I'll talk a bit about this in terms of my experience, but it's amazing how much more willing someone is to talk to you when you have the presence of a dog with you. Whereas, they might not even consider it if the dog wasn't there. Oftentimes it's because you can start the conversation around things like the dog. There's something there to talk about. It's like if you're trying to get a kiddo to, chat with you about something difficult, do it while you're in the car. No one has to look at each other, and there's generally other distractions going on that allow the person to be able to sort of start facilitating that conversation. So the dogs can really assist in building sort of those trusting relationships and breaking down those barriers, creating safe spaces for effective and meaningful conversations, and then, of course, immediately triggering physiological changes in our body, which we know that as long as you enjoy the presence of dogs, those can be helpful, and that supports sort of the healing journey. So they establish rapport, they assist with that, they assist in sort of offering a calm and helpful distraction to start conversations, and really just build sort of a therapeutic bridge through being fully present. And that's something that can be very difficult, in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic situation. So those peer support dogs, like I said, we have Ajax in Mississauga, and we have Neely, who just went out recently to Sudbury EMS and fire. And the reports we get back from those organizations are that those dogs really do make a difference in those communities, sort of on a wide reaching scale, which is really cool. So that's sort of the second category in terms of our main categories of CAI and facility dogs. And that leads us to, like I said, biasly my favorite, the justice facility dog category. So this is where my journey with NSD starts. Back in, I guess it would have been 2015, would have been when I applied. I started working at the Child Witness Program at the London Family Court Clinic. Our role there was to provide support to children and youth who were testifying in criminal court matters. And so we were to prep them for that. We were to get them ready for court. We were to sit with them while they provided testimony, all those sorts of things. And while we had, wonderful literature and research on how to best do this, I still found that it was an incredibly traumatic experience for kids who were having to testify in court. So the criminal code did do a great job in adding some things to help kiddos who are testifying, things like testifying from outside of the courtroom, things like not allowing the accused, if they were self-represented, to cross-examine the child witness, allowing the child to have a screen in front of them to not see the accused if they weren't going to be testifying from outside of the courtroom. All of those wonderful things were fantastic, and we had come a long way in having those available, but it was still an incredibly challenging experience for kiddos, arguably for adults as well, but our focus was on kiddos at the time. And so I thought, what can we do to make this a little bit more bearable for kids? That's when I came across Caber, like I said, who was working hard out in BC. And I thought, why don't we bring this a little more east and do this here? And so out of that, I applied to National Service Dogs, like I said, in early 2015. And in fall of 2016, NSD Merrill, who's now Ambassador Dog Merrill, was the first facility dog, accredited facility dog in Ontario, followed by her brother Iggy, who we always like to brag. Iggy had to stay a little extra longer in school. Merrill was the superstar, and we always like to remind Iggy of that. And then many other dogs have followed in her, I was going to say footsteps, but paw prints, I guess, is the better word for that, since she joined the London courthouse in 2016. So in terms of justice facility dogs, they participate in a ton of different interventions in and around the justice system. In terms of where we have dogs placed, like I said, we have dogs in child witness programs specifically. So Meryl's sister Weiser, who took over for her when she retired, at a CYAC, so a Child and Youth Advocacy Center. That's where Meryl's brother Iggy, as well as Jersey and Aria work. And then in police victim services as well, so not civilian organizations, but police victim services themselves. We have a number of dogs. We have Cornwall Police, Ottawa Police. I'm going to forget some, but we have a number of dogs west in Ottawa who provide. Pixie, thank you. Meryl's sister. How could I forget? That's so rude. Yeah, so we have a number of CAI dogs out in police victim services as well. So those dogs are often doing things like, of course, facilitating crisis interventions. A lot of those police service dogs will do a lot of those mass casualty, mass victimization responses. I know West, when there was that big transit accident, I think that happened in Ottawa a couple years ago, West responded to that. There was a group of dogs that went out to the Route 91 music festival shooting that happened a couple years ago now. I know Caber went out there. There was a couple Canadian dogs and then American dogs that went out to do that. A couple dogs responded to the Humboldt Broncos tragedy. So various dogs doing various sort of crisis interventions. In terms of the CYAC dogs or the child witness program dogs, which is what Meryl was doing, things like court preparation. It was funny when Christy said, I have to remind people that, I was there as well. There were many clients who would show up to see Meryl for their appointment with me. But if Meryl was not there for whatever reason, the appointment would be canceled and they would return again when it was convenient for them and when Meryl was present. And so I took no offense to that. My job was much easier when Meryl was there anyways. But I did become sort of the human without a name behind Meryl. So court preparation, taking kids on tours of the courthouse became much easier because they had a leash in their hand. And in a courthouse, and especially in a setting where they're having to testify, kids have little to no sort of direction or sort of choice about what they're doing. They have to come to court. They have to testify. They have to talk about something they're not interested in talking about. And the one thing that these kiddos then had control over was the dog. And so, you could teach them in a session to give Meryl commands or cues. Sorry, Ellie, that's my old brain. And ask them to, Meryl forward, Meryl sit, Meryl down. Meryl also could bow for the judge. And so the kiddos could take the leash and take control over Meryl, which was a really empowering thing for kids who, like I said, in that circumstance, had very little power elsewhere. So that was really, really neat. Again, there was times when if Meryl wasn't there, there's no way that we would have had the kid attend to testify. Specifically, I would say with our human trafficking victims, a lot of them would only attend if the deal was that if Meryl was going to be there. And so there are many cases that I can confidently say would not have been prosecuted if it were not for Meryl. And I think I can say that across jurisdictions, whether it's Iggy, whether it's, Jersey or whoever, without the presence of the dog, a lot of those prosecutions wouldn't have gone forward. They will also participate in things like forensic interviews. So again, when the kids come into the police station, that's obviously a very challenging environment. It's very sterile. It's very sort of, structured. Again, they're having to talk about something that they have no interest in talking about. And so the dogs are really there to provide sort of that unconditional support So, the kiddo would go into the room, they would sit on the couch, you'd call Meryl up, she would snooze away on the couch while they gave their sort of account of what happened. The only major issue was that she would snore, and the mics would pick that up. So occasionally when we were playing a statement in court, you would hear her snoring in the background of that police statement. That was also an issue with the record. The poor court reporters would often have to interrupt things because the dog was snoring on record, getting in the way of their recording. So one of Meryl didn't have many downfalls, but that was one of them. And I don't think the trainers could have done anything about that. But they would participate in forensic interviews, hospital examinations as well. I'm not familiar. I think Iggy does participate in their medical examinations because they do them right at the Child Witness Center. And so dogs will go in to participate in those, which you could imagine makes those much easier. Pre-trial interviews, anything really to get kids ready for court. And then of course, the main event, which was attending with them on the day of trial. So Meryl or Iggy or any other dogs in those sort of situations would meet the kid, the morning of. We would often meet outside of the courthouse so that they could walk, Meryl into the courthouse. And the dog would be with them throughout the entirety of the day, sit with them when they're testifying, whether that's in the CCTV room, which is the room outside of the courtroom where the kiddos could testify from, or inside the courtroom. Some of the older courthouses were a little tricky because you'd have to sort of wedge the dog and the kid in the witness box, but we always made it work. Meryl always found a way to snore, even it was a very tight space. And so that was sort of the main event, and really what these dogs were really there for, which was to be there on the day of and to provide support. The other really neat thing was sort of the consistency that it provided. So there's a lot of changeover in the court system. And so kids would meet a police officer and have to provide, their information to them. Then they'd come to the courthouse, they'd meet a Crown attorney. Then the case would take 3 years, to go through the court system, and that Crown attorney would be off and they'd meet a new Crown attorney. And maybe that officer wasn't there anymore, they'd meet a new officer. But the one thing that was consistent was the dog. And that's what a lot of them will talk about. That was why it was one really wonderful thing about Meryl's sister taking over for Meryl when she retired, was that transition was much easier, explaining to kiddos that this is Meryl's sister. She's taking over for her. And I know that sounds silly, but to a lot of kiddos that meant a lot, because it was that continued sort of consistency for them. The other really cool thing that we talked about the unintended consequences, or the things that we didn't expect. Meryl did a lot of jury interventions. So people who had been acting as jury members on particularly challenging cases, whether it be homicides, things like that. Once they delivered a verdict, it was actually we call them blue jackets, court administrator, who sort of runs the jury, said, the jury has asked if Meryl could come and visit. And it's something I had never thought about, never considered. And of course we said yes, because what else are you going to say? And from there, that was really sort of something that was borne out, that after a jury gave a particularly challenging verdict or had a particularly challenging case, we would offer the support of Meryl after that, just to have a debrief and a visit, before they leave the courthouse. So justice facility dogs are sort of doing lots of different things, generally in and around the court process. It's something that once I had Meryl, and I think all of the other facility dog handlers would sort of echo this, I couldn't actually imagine doing my work without her. So like I said, oftentimes I heard things like, I'm only coming if Meryl's going to be there. And if Meryl's not going to be there, forget it. you can reschedule my appointment. Luckily, she had a pretty good attendance record because she came with me. But if for whatever reason she couldn't be there, that was something that we heard a lot. There was things like Meryl going for lunch with kids. Again, not something that, we anticipated, but it was a really big deal if, if they got to go for lunch with Meryl. Meryl rode in a lot of police cars, which I'm not sure if she necessarily enjoyed, but got to go to a lot of lunches that way. Things like birthday parties. So we had a birthday party for Meryl every year, and we would often have clients come back for that birthday party every year to see Meryl. And if I had ever, thought before Meryl that a kid would come back to the courthouse after testifying in court through, what was arguably one of the most challenging days of their life in the most challenging environment of their life, if you had told me that they would come back to that setting for a dog's birthday party, like it's just something I couldn't have imagined. And so it was really, really neat to sort of see the unintended consequences of that. We talked a little bit about it. I think Christy talked a little bit about it, the impact on staff as well. Meryl wasn't a peer support dog like her other colleagues who are doing similar sort of work. However, again, one of those really great unintended consequences was that Meryl had an incredibly positive impact, and all others doing this type of work continued to have that impact on other justice professionals, whether that be police that they engage with, whether that be, crown attorneys, defense lawyers, believe it or not, judges. We would often have time where Meryl would go back in judges' chambers and would whip around there. Whip around is a strong word if you know Meryl, so that's a bit of a stretch, but would jog slightly and show some enthusiasm. And so the impact on the courthouse was sort of much more far-reaching than we could have ever imagined. And like I said, most facility dogs, if not all, I think would report similar type of response to their facility dog. So really an amazing program. These dogs are doing amazing work. And it's, like I said, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it. They have a very wide-reaching impact, and they're really changing the justice experience for hundreds, like I said, if not thousands, of kids who are coming through. We have one judge who is I actually just heard the other day, he still asked, it was an adult case, so the dog wasn't involved. Every case he asked, is Wiser going to be in the courtroom? And we're like, nope, she's 38 and Wiser's here for the kids. So there's still a lot of enthusiasm around having the dogs in the courtroom. So yeah, so maybe I'll leave it at that and open it up to questions, because I know we're supposed to be done at 7 and I have rambled as I sometimes do. So if there's any questions about any of our CAI facility dog programs, I would be more than happy to answer them, or Danny or Rochelle or anyone else who's on the call who can speak to those.
Yeah, feel free to pop yourself off mute if you have a question. I was maybe gonna ask Rachel if you could just briefly, because I think you're our first speaker in one of these that has a retired dog. So if you could briefly go into Meryl's retirement and how well she lives now.
Yes, for the record, she lived well before. She had a good life before, but that's actually, sort of a pivotal piece of Meryl's story is that she was retired much earlier than we would have liked and anticipated, because she was diagnosed with Addison's disease. It's a disease of the adrenal glands. Long story short, you don't produce cortisol naturally, and so she's on medication. It's completely managed and she is fine. The challenge with the medication she was on was that you had to pee a lot, and there's not a lot of time to do that when you're in court for an 8-hour day. And with her medication balanced out and us taking good care of her, she is doing completely fine, which is now why she has joined the NSD team as an ambassador dog. So, you know, every so often I pull out the jacket and she gives me this look like, ladies, what are we doing? You know, I had my retirement party and I'm finished. That's one thing, actually. Meryl's retirement party was the most attended retirement party at the London courthouse. You know, even after some judges and defense lawyers and crowns who'd been there for 30 years, we went through 3 Costco cakes, and it was the most attended party there. And so, yes, Meryl lives her best life, although again, I argue she always did. But a little less intense. There's no more 8 hours of court time, but she does now work as an ambassador dog, helping us sort of further the mission of NSD, and showing people out in the community what these dogs can do. And she does continue to sneak into NSD University at any time she can, because she likes Emma and Ellie's treat pouch. They would like to say that she likes them. She might, but she also just really likes their treat pouches.
I just wanted to take a second on behalf of the team, though, Rachel, and thank you, not just as a staff member, but as an advocate. You really, as you mentioned, you and Meryl were our first justice facility dogs, and you have been speaking and advocating for these programs, and helping to onboard future clients on that. And we as an agency are incredibly grateful for the time over and above your real work, whether it was for NSD or for your former employer, in helping to educate people and to bring other programs on board and answer questions. When you're breaking new ground, everybody's a little bit scared of how it's going to look, what's this and what's that. And we appreciate the time and effort that went into bringing those other programs along and helping them do the best they can with the dogs that they have within their communities. So your passion definitely shines through, but we're grateful that we have you both on our advocacy side and on our staff side now. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.